Okay. I want to make sure that I have a recording that I can put up later because I promised people the recording. All right. It's Friday. Anything can happen, and anything that can happen will happen. After pretty much like 3 months of flawless streaming from Zoom to Facebook, all of a sudden today, Facebook no longer supports Zoom live streaming, or that's what they told me. That's what is going on. So maybe it's just me. Everyone knows that I have infamous tech fails. If you've been watching any kind of webinar, any kind of Facebook Live with me for a while, then you know that there's always something that, like, if something can go wrong, it will. But I actually really like this, and I can see everyone's faces, and I can see everyone who's participating. So yeah, I'll just be letting people in throughout the presentation. So this is going to be my last one of these for a while. I'm going to take a little break probably for April and May, but I'm really excited that you're here today. The topic, the category is using social media to engage digital donors. And we have a fantastic guest for you today. I'm going to do speaker view, I think, for the recording. I don't really know. Well, anyway, it's going to be very casual. We're all going to see each other. Oh, just so you know, this is being recorded. So if you're on here and you're supposed to be working, turn your camera off or change your name or do something else. This will be recorded and put on Facebook. I just wanted you to know that. Make sure that you're asking questions throughout in the chat. And just thank you so much for bearing with me. I know I'm going to get a lot of angry emails. Where are you? What are you doing? You're not on Facebook. But we're making it work. So yes, I would just put yourself on mute if you are, I might call on people. Everyone seems to be on mute. I might call on people to talk at some point if it makes sense, but I want you to get to know my friend Nick. So I'm going to do his introduction right now. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. So Nick is the director of marketing at fundraiseup, which is one of my absolute favorite online fundraising platforms. They have the goal of using machine learning, human-centered design, and magic to double your revenue. I love that on the website. And also, Nick is a marketing professional dedicated to using his strengths in writing and design to grow the good in the world. Through his work at fundraiseup, he's able to support nonprofits in advancing their missions by making it easier for their donors to give well. In his personal life, he's driven by a passion to make education more accessible and better individualized for learners. And at home, you'll find him preparing the table for a good meal. I love it. I want to see, I want to hear what your favorite thing is to cook. He sees food as the common denominator, a universal language for bringing the world together. I love that. I muted you, Nick, because I muted everybody, so you might have to unmute yourself. All right, so
I should be unmuted now.
I promised I would, well, first of all, I want to hear what your favorite thing is to cook, but secondly, I want to hear about your most interesting celebrity encounter.
Yes. Well, I will start by saying that one of my goals in life after FundraiseUp is to become a professional chef and baker. And in fact, baking is perhaps my favorite activity at home. And so if any of you are in the area, I do make some delicious scones from scratch. So stop by anytime. I can do them with regular flour, and I can do them gluten-free. I have all of those flours at home, so a lot of possibilities there for sharing a meal and hopefully some coffee together.
Yes, awesome. Well, thank you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
So, my audience, they hear me talk a lot about social media, as a way to keep up a presence, as a way to build that know, like, and trust factor, which is absolutely vital, especially in fundraising, but also a way to reach new audiences and really show your audience what you stand for, what you're all about. So I know that digital donations are on the rise. I've read all of the reports, especially last year. Digital donations drove most of the COVID-19 fundraising that was occurring. And it's rising, as a powerful tool to build relationships, not only with current donors, but attract new ones. So can you tell me a little bit about maybe some of your top tips about engaging these digital donors, or maybe where can an organization start if they're just kind of starting out?
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you used the term digital donor, because that is what we as a company have focused our attention on. And recognizing that as time progresses, the digital donor will occupy more and more of the giving pie. In fact, I think it was in 2020 that we saw significant growth in online giving. And in fact, we saw it almost mirror the same type of performance that we see in the e-commerce world. And one of the key takeaways from those numbers and that comparison is that, and sometimes this is hard to remember, but our donors are also consumers. And so consumer behavior is the same as donor behavior and vice versa. And when we saw those numbers roughly match in terms of online purchasing versus online giving, it's a reminder to us to create a giving opportunity for those digital donors, those people who are on their phone, they're making purchases, and they're also ready to make donations as well. And of course, one of the best way to engage these digital donors is going to be through channels like social media, whether it's Facebook or LinkedIn or Instagram or even TikTok and now Clubhouse. There are so many opportunities to bring people into the fold. And truly, if the pandemic did one great thing technology-wise, it was to bring everybody online and into the Zoom realm, the Microsoft Teams realm. And for a lot of nonprofits, that was a big shift they had to make, of course, to suddenly start to leverage technologies that before, seemed just out of reach. Maybe they were used more by corporate America, but now, again, Zoom and Microsoft Teams, they're part of our daily lives. So engaging people in those ways. And, there's a really simple way that we look at this. And it might seem like a no-brainer, but to provide donors with the ability to share that they gave. So after they complete a donation on a nonprofit's website, to click a button, share to Facebook, share to LinkedIn, share in an email. And we were really curious about how a feature like that performs. And from the study of our own customers, and this was over 1 million transactions, there was about 15% of people who, after a donation, will go on and share on social media that they show support to the nonprofit. And to be honest, that caught me off guard, because my assumption, and I come from a fundraising marketing background, and I would build out giving forms that, I would throw in a Facebook link or a Facebook button on there and just said, I'll throw it on there just because it looks nice and it fits in the design I've created for this form. But through our study here at FundraiseuP, we found that people actually do engage with these types of tools to show that they shared support. And that, again, was a kind of an eye-opening revelation for me, because my assumption was that, maybe 1 or 2 people will click this and that's about it. But people do go on to share this. And what we can then look at as part of the digital donor journey is the ability for a nonprofit to track who shared that they made a donation, and then to track the link back to that donation form so we can see who else chooses to donate. And it all gets wrapped into this new digital donor journey that, as the nonprofit sector, we have to understand and we have to leverage so that we are able to match the expectations of consumers and the technology that they expect to encounter online.
Oh my gosh. That is so, first of all, that's incredibly important. The expectations, because I want to get back to that. The expectations of a frictionless experience the expectation that we have when we can just swipe right on Amazon and purchase something, the expectation that I will go to a form and not have to enter like my social security number and my firstborn's information in order to fill out the form, the expectation that I can actually access it from a phone, all of that. I think I love what you said, and you brought up consumer behavior. So what happens with me is I get into like Twitter flame wars with people that say, well, online giving, I don't know the statistic, is 18% right now or something. I don't remember, but it's, let's say it's 18%, but it's always very consistent with e-commerce, because what happens is that people are taking all the giving, that $1 billion donation to Harvard, right, is kind of mixed in with it. So consumer behavior definitely reflects donor behavior. Like e-commerce is not 90, you would think it's 90% of our purchasing, but it's not, because think about cars, think about groceries, think about the pharmacy. We still do a lot of shopping in person, but it's growing. So I love that you brought up the kind of convergence of our donors are consumers, and donor behavior and consumer behavior are both going up. So this is something I think my audience would want to know. What do you say to the board member, or to maybe somebody on here right now that says, well, our donors don't want to give online, or like our donors are older and they're not on social media, they're not online? What would you say to them?
That's always such a tricky situation, especially with the board, because in many ways they have some decision-making power there. But the truth is that I think more often than not, we misrepresent who our donors are. And sometimes we think that we might know our donors better than we actually do. And so you absolutely will find that there is a very special digital donor audience. And the onus then is on us as the nonprofit industry to better understand who they are, to really meet them where they are. And so, Julie, a few moments ago, you talked about some of those friction points that exist in online giving. And so to meet the expectations of a digital donor and to prove to administration and to boards that these digital donors exist, we have to put the right vessels in place for these digital donors to give. And that includes a frictionless giving experience, and recognizing that some of the information that we're used to collecting isn't going to be necessary for engaging our digital donors. A great example of this is the mailing address. And in the old world of fundraising, maybe that information was required for a successful transaction. It was part of the verification information that would allow you to process a donor's credit card. That's not the case anymore. We don't need that information to securely verify a donor's identity. And yet, so many forms still require that information to be input. And if we're talking about digital donors, we're also talking about digital nomads. These are people who maybe are working remotely, but they're not just working remotely from home, they're moving around. In fact, there are some companies that exist that provide services to remote workers where they will take them on journeys through Europe and America and South America. And so they don't have a mailing address per se. But what they do have is their set of digital credentials, especially their email address. And so at fundraiseup, that's one of the opportunities that we saw, that to remove friction for digital donors, we remove the information as much as possible that is required for them to give online. And so through our platform, as an example, you really just need the first name, the last name, and the email address to make a donation. You don't need anything else. And again, that this is a hard pill to swallow for some nonprofits, and even more so for some board members who may not understand who the digital donor is. But we did a study on mailing address fields specifically, and especially for international donors, you actually see a conversion drop off of upwards of 18%. That's almost 20% loss of people who intended to show support but ultimately didn't, because they were required to give an address, and for one reason or another, they either weren't able to give that address or didn't feel that they wanted to give the address during that donation checkout process.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm kind of struggling with a client right now because it's not a fundraising form. It's more of a marketing form where we're trying to build their email list, but the development office and the marketing office are complete like loggerheads, because the marketing office knows you ask for a name and an email, and that's what you do. And then you build a relationship from there. But the development office is still, I don't know why the door slammed here, but the development office is still very, like you said, traditional. We got to get that address. We got to build that relationship in that way. So we're definitely struggling with that. But I think that's really interesting. So with this form, I mean, I'm assuming the proof is in the pudding. Like conversions are probably really huge with just like a very, very simplified form. And do you see, I mean, I know that you do because this is your company, but I really see this as the future of fundraising. I mean, what I see organizations that, you have the PayPal option, you have, I don't know, you can't do Venmo right now, but you have Google Pay or Apple Pay, or you have all the options for people so they can easily complete this transaction via a mobile device. And like you said, a digital nomad. I mean, mailing address doesn't matter as much anymore.
Yeah, and I'm thinking of Instagram off the top of my head, where if you consider the account creation process for Instagram, they're not asking you for a long list of information to create an account. They want to know your name and your email address or your phone number. Those are really the only 3 pieces of information you need to become a member of the Instagram community. And a lot of times, that information can be autofilled from your device. So your phone might automatically drop in your first name and last name, email address, or phone number. And Julia, you're right that this is where we need to see nonprofit technology go, to mirror those experiences. And talking even more about some of these digital wallet methods of giving, those are only going to become more and more important. Here's a real world example. So here in New York City, traditionally you would board the subway by using a Metro card, essentially a piece of paper or plastic that you swipe in to access the subway system. Well, New York has just completed a massive experiment with their new touchless method of boarding the subway, where you can take your phone, or even in my case, my Apple Watch, and I can tap it against the device at the turnstile, and it's accessing my stored payment method on my devices to allow me entry to the subway system. And so the plan now for the city of New York is to completely do away with swiping subway Metro cards.
Well, COVID, I think, changed that too.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so this is a perfect example of how we see these legacy technologies not only start to become less popular, but to be phased out completely. And I mean, we can even look at some city governments that have either instituted completely cashless methods of payment, or have had to actually push back and say, whoa, there's still people who use cash. We're not quite yet ready to go completely contactless and cashless, but it's coming. We see it, it's here in many ways. And again, as a nonprofit community, we can't take the back seat to this technological advancement. We have to track with it, because it all comes back down to our donors, our consumers. And I did pull up the Blackbaud report, Julia, with those numbers in it. And so in 2020, 12.9% of all charitable giving came from online giving. And that is very close to the 14.3% of online e-commerce sales. So we see those percentages really starting to align, and again, recognizing that our approach to technology needs to have the same ease of use as e-commerce.
And it goes back to meeting your donors where they are, not necessarily where you want them to be. So this segues perfectly into the next topic that I want to talk about, which is, fundraising on social media using peer to peer. Now, first of all, if you're just joining us, I let a ton of people into the waiting room. Welcome. You're here with me, Julia Campbell, and Nick Miller, the Director of Marketing at fundraiseup, and we're talking about social media to engage digital donors. So welcome. So I want to transition into talking about social media fundraising and peer-to-peer fundraisers. Now, I don't know. I would love some tips on it. I would also love to address the gigantic, I think challenge that organizations have, which is that you can't get the donor data from Facebook and Instagram. So what are your recommendations around that?
This is very timely, and of course, like you said, it's a perfect segue because we're talking about how we need to match the consumer experience. And so some of these consumer platforms and social media networks like Facebook and Instagram make it possible for donors to give to essentially any charity through a donor advised fund, and of course provides the ability for a nonprofit to fundraise through these platforms. And like you're saying, Julia, there's pros and cons, right? And to be fair, there is a huge pro, and in fact, there were numbers that were recently released that I believe charitable giving through social media was in the billions of dollars in 2020. That's a lot of money, and that's a lot of money that's powering significant good in the world. And initially, it looks great on the surface because nonprofits are receiving more support to do more good in the world. But there is this issue of access to information and the ability to create the meaningful experience that nonprofits have to do to steward their donors appropriately and effectively. And so through these online social media platforms, it can be tricky because they might not divulge to the nonprofit all of the information that they might need to have. They might just say, you received 1,000 donations equaling $1 million. Here's a check, have a great day. And while it's money in the bank, there's no relationship that's really been built here. And that's truly at the core of what makes the nonprofit sector meaningful to a donor. Is for you, Julia, and me, Nick, to, when we give a donation, to know and to see and be told that it made a difference. It built a well, it built a school, it took people who are houseless and put a roof over their head. And that's one of the challenges that we see with social media, with the built-in abilities to fundraise. But there are opportunities here. There's a lot of ways to leverage these networks. And of course, through what we've created here at fundraiseup, we have built out a peer-to-peer feature. And we, of course, have owned the digital donation space and have found ways to make this work with your social media outreach. And to be honest, it can be as simple as sharing a link on social media, which shows a beautiful image from your website, and then when a donor clicks on that link, it launches instantly on your website, your nonprofit's website, the online donation experience. So again, there's ways to make this work so that you still receive significant support through social media, but you're also able to know who's giving and to build relationships with them.
Okay. So I think that the important issue here is to have the tools readily available. And this is what I always tell my clients and my audience, is to use the tools, sign up for the tools, but you cannot put all your eggs in that basket of the tools. The other important issue that I think needs to be raised is, there was just a congressional hearing yesterday with Zuckerberg, members of Google, Jack Dorsey from Twitter, around the ethical implications of social media in terms of spreading disinformation and hate speech. And I didn't listen to the whole thing because those hearings kind of drive me nuts. But because
They
nothing gets
are
said.
really difficult to listen to
Nothing gets
sometimes.
said, and it just is a lot of posturing, and it's a lot of politics. But this is something that a lot of people in the sector struggle with. I'm a member of a listserv called the Progressive Exchange, where a lot of organizations are really struggling. Should we even be on Facebook? Should we be using these tools? Should we be accepting donations? And the way I think about it is just what you said. Use the tools to raise money to change the world and impact it in a good way. So I think that, because they're not taking any fees. So they are benefiting by looking really good, and they're benefiting by getting traffic and all of that kind of stuff. But if I mailed you a $10 bill in the mail and I didn't put a return address on it and you didn't know where it came from, you would hopefully still take it and use it to do good in the world. You wouldn't have your whole fundraising program rely on random anonymous $10 donations,
Yes.
right? But you would still accept the money, and you would hopefully, still do some good with that money. So I think the key with social media fundraising going forward is just to leverage it in a way that it enhances what you're already doing, and then use it during Giving Tuesday or days when people are really active on social media, but don't put all of your eggs in that basket. And I am a social media consultant. I've written books about social media, but I always tell people, bring people over to your email list, try to get them to register for a petition, try to get them onto your website, try to just build that deeper relationship with them, because we don't own these audiences and we don't control what they do. And, new algorithm like Facebook today, right, could just pull the rug out from under us for no reason, decide that it doesn't work with Zoom anymore. I mean, you know what I mean? We can't control it.
Exactly.
So I think, okay, so I have, I've got some questions. Well, first of all, I have a question about Clubhouse. Are you on Clubhouse?
I am. Somebody finally was generous enough to share an invitation with me.
I don't have an iPhone. I have a Google Pixel.
Oh.
So I'm like this big dork over here, this loser in the corner, and I don't have. So I have an iPad. I guess I could use it. But can you tell us a little bit about Clubhouse and maybe how you see it fitting in to the whole online fundraising ecosystem and some of the potentials there? I think people are really excited to learn about it, and unfortunately, I don't really know that much because I haven't been able to sign up yet.
So Julie, if I send you an iPhone, will that help?
I have an old iPhone. Like everybody has, 10 like iPhone 6s in their house. Yes. I definitely have one, so I could probably do it. But you got to convince me.
Well, when you get it set up, I'll send you an invitation.
Oh, good.
To Clubhouse, since it is still relatively exclusive. And that being said, it has introduced a new realm of possibilities. And what a perfect time for it to gain popularity than now, when we either are feeling Zoom fatigue or are reading about others being fatigued by Zoom calls. And so it offers a less formal environment for us to engage in conversations. And in the context of our donor stewardship, it's a really fantastic way to create these informal spaces, to share an update from the field, perhaps, how the donor's work is, or the donor support is powering the work of the nonprofit. So imagine with me, if you will, I run a nonprofit that builds wells around the world, and I am stationed, let's say, I'm in Brazil. And I send out a message to our donors, our digital donors, and I say, hey, we have just struck water. This is incredibly exciting. You made this possible. Please click here to join our Clubhouse, because we want to share more with you. We want you to hear the voices of the people who are being impacted by this. And the beautiful thing there is everybody is a part of this community, but you don't have to worry about what you're wearing, what time of day it is. Maybe you're still in bed, because nobody can see you. Nobody can see your...
I had to blow dry my hair today, put on makeup.
Exactly.
Sometimes you don't want to do that.
Absolutely. So this is an opportunity for you to just engage in conversation, and maybe it's running on your iPad and you just set your iPad down and continue going about your day. but you're still listening into this conversation, and maybe you're literally hearing the roar of water pouring forth from this well that's just been dug. And to me, as a donor, I know that I would be excited to be a part of that. I would think, oh my word, this is incredible. Like they did it. They actually did it. Like I gave $100 6 months ago, and they finally have achieved the goal, and they've been able to dig this well. And I'm now more excited about showing greater support. And this might be slightly tangential, but I really like to see donors as investors and the nonprofit as, say, a startup, not unlike fundraiseup. And as a startup, you have to be able to show your investors that the money that they have put in is leading to growth. And so a platform like Clubhouse lets you demonstrate that in an incredibly tangible way.
I think that's cool. I mean, I know all of the, these up and coming platforms. I wouldn't say TikTok's up and coming. It's pretty established, but it's so easy to grow a following there. So I feel like a lot of people struggle to grow their Facebook page, right? Then they struggle to grow then they struggle to grow their Instagram. But the nonprofits that I've seen on TikTok, they go to 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 followers in like 5 minutes. I mean, you have to know what you're doing on TikTok. It's a learning curve, but there seemed to be all this potential to really, like you said, show your donor exactly what you're doing. And I think that's super important because, fundraiseup, an incredible online fundraising platform. We have social media, we have email, but the tools to me, I mean, the tools to make the donation are important, but the tools at the end of the day, the donor wants to know, what problem am I helping solve? And am I making a meaningful contribution in a way that makes me feel good and makes me feel proud and makes me feel excited, to be a part of this journey, to be a part of this mission. So, I want everyone to ask some questions. We have probably about 10 more minutes here with Nick, but you had mentioned to me you wanted to talk about social media audience segmentation.
Absolutely.
And I'd love to learn more about that and how we can incorporate that into our fundraising plans and marketing plans.
Yes. If there's one wish that I have for this next decade, it is that we christen this time as the decade of nonprofits being data-driven, and using those data insights to power smarter and better fundraising. And at the core of that is understanding your audience and being able to properly segment them. And I've been to enough conferences and listened to enough talks about data segmentation that at first you get kind of scared, like, oh, this seems like quite the endeavor. I don't know how we're going to review thousands of records in our file and properly segment them. But I promise if you start small and work your way up, it's completely manageable. And if you are from a nonprofit right now that doesn't have a very large digital audience, this is the perfect time to identify who those donors are and segment them. And I will always promote placing your digital donors in their own realm, in their own segment, and feeding them what they want and what they need. And one of the ways that we're able to do this in the marketing world is to use what are called UTM tags to track where traffic is coming from. And so, for example, and by the way, these UTM tags, if you're not familiar with them, are parameters that are added to a URL. So, for example, we might have fundraiseup.com / some characters, and then there will be something that might say campaign equals, and that's where we fill in like what campaign this page is a part of and the traffic that drove it there. And so in the nonprofit view, you might create these UTM parameters to help monitor where donors are coming from based on social media channel. So you might use a parameter to identify LinkedIn traffic, Instagram traffic, TikTok traffic, etc. And the reason this is so important is because without these tracking tools, you're just getting money. And going back to what you mentioned earlier, Julia, about a donor who just stuffs a $10 bill into an unmarked envelope and sends it to you, you don't know who they are. You're grateful that they showed support, but you have no idea who they are and where they are and how you might better communicate with them in the future. And the same applies to the digital sphere. Let's say that there's a donate button in TikTok and somebody taps that donate button, but you don't know that they came from TikTok. You'll never be able to create a TikTok audience. And imagine how powerful it can be to have a TikTok specific audience, an Instagram specific audience, a Facebook specific audience, and then in the row above it, a social media audience that incorporates all of those platforms. Because there will always be opportunities in each of those audiences for special ways of communicating with donors. And many of you likely know this already, but one of the worst things you can do with social media is to take the same message and post it without any changes to all of your networks in all the same ways. We know that Twitter has a character limit, for example, and apps like TikTok, the video is oriented vertically. So if you posted a horizontally oriented video across your other platforms like LinkedIn and then posted it to TikTok, chances are you're not going to see the same type of performance out of it. So knowing these audiences, you're able to craft your content around how those potential donors and supporters want to ingest it. And I saw a question that just came in about adding those UTM parameters, and here's the really beautiful thing. In the most simple sense, you don't need to have a fancy piece of software to generate these. You can take your existing donate form URL, and maybe it's mycharity.org/donate, and you can just add in those parameters and then use that as the link in, say, your MailChimp email. It can be a little tricky though, and that's why there are tools that exist to help you build these. In fact, I'm sure if you did a simple Google search of UTM builder or UTM generator, that you would find a dozen websites that would help you automate this process. Here at fundraiseup, we use a CRM called HubSpot that has a built-in tracking link builder. And so I don't have to manually construct the URL myself. I just tell it what information I want it to show, and then it's going to render the UTM'd link for me. But again, there are free resources that will help you do this. And the point of it, once more, is to provide you with visibility on where people are coming from. And I'll tell you, as a company here at fundraiseup, this is how we know where our demo requests are coming from. And so we will set up specific UTM parameters to let us know that a demo request came from today's presentation, or that a demo request came from a conference, and more specifically that it came from N10 NTC 2021. And I think you are starting to understand, how this works and the value that it provides. But this is key to creating that segmentation that we need to have in place if we are going to be data-driven nonprofits this decade.
Oh, and I love that, because then you can see, I posted my donate link on Twitter and it came in with 10% of the donations, or I posted it in my Instagram bio, and you can actually track where people are coming to your donate link from and where the donations are coming from. And then that will just give you much better information to spend your limited time and your limited resources. Because if you're spending all your time on LinkedIn, but all of your traffic is coming from, Facebook or from something else, I love that idea. And then thinking about blog posts that you write, or conferences that you do, or if you are guest blogging, or if you're working with other organizations in partnership, really determining the return on investment and where you should be putting your time. So I think that's fantastic. We have another question from Stacy, and she asks, what's the ideal, well, I'm assuming Stacy asks, what's the ideal cadence for stewardship outreach after you bring a donor on board? Not sure how often to be reaching out to deepen the relationship. So can I answer that one?
Yes, absolutely.
I'm going to direct you, Stacy, to Lynn Wester, the donor guru. She wrote the 4 pillars of donor relations. She's my go-to in terms of donor relations. And she said 7 touches. That's what she says. Now, I consider an email, I consider social media a little bit of a touch. You're not so sure if you're actually reaching somebody. But I think that social media is a big piece of the donor relations pie. And I think that it really depends. What I wouldn't do is just ask them for a donation right after they've given a donation. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Nick, but Stacy, I'll get you that information on Lynn Wester.
Yes. Two thoughts, and I will second what Julia has said about that's 7 times rule. And I've seen that be effective in the past with nonprofits. But I'll also include that so many of these rules are meant as guidance, but are also meant to be broken. And so you may find that a cadence with fewer touches works better, and you may find that a cadence with a greater number of touches works better. And it's all about experimentation and testing what's going to work specifically with your audience. The second thought I have on this does have to do with that second ask, because we know it can be incredibly challenging to lock in a second ask from a donor. And there are indeed good ways of doing it and ways that are not so good and might actually turn a donor off from showing future support. One of the features we recently released for the fundraiseup platform, for example, is a post-donation upsell. So let me just briefly describe what that means. So let's say that I am a donor making one-time gift of $35. I complete the donation process. I get a nice thank you message there on the screen. But then I also am prompted to either do one of 2 things. Number one, the prompt might say, would you like to give this same gift again at this time next year? Yes or no? And if I click yes, there's nothing more I have to do. We're just going to process the payment token that we already have on file for that specific donation. Or the upsell can be to monthly support. And it might say, thank you for your one-time gift of $35. Would you also consider giving monthly and show an amount there? And that, I think, is a really great way to lock in that second ask, because it's right there in the heat of the moment. The donor has just shown support, and chances are they're going to be willing to show support again in that moment. I don't know that we could say the same a day or 2 later. And that's where that second ask as part of those early stage follow-ups might not be as effective.
I love that. And I know that nonprofits are very hesitant to do that, like it's the upsell, but it really works. So Facebook does it too. If you're giving on Facebook, actually a Facebook donation form will say, do you want to make this a recurring donation? Do you want to make this an annual donation? And I know that I prefer to give monthly because I don't have to think about it. I just, it's not a burdensome thing for me to do at the end of the year when I'm buying all the Lego sets and all the Christmas presents and everything. And it just helps with my taxes. I can predict it. And also, having worked in a nonprofit, I know how important it is to have that recurring revenue and be able to count on it. So for me, it's a preference. I know for a lot of people, I mean, I'm like Gen X, Gen Y, I think really they prefer to give monthly. So to give them that option, because we can't assume that they know that this is even an option. And they might just think, oh, I can only give once, or, oh, the form only says once. But then if they see that option, they can always say no. They're not going to be upset. You're doing this really for them to make things more convenient for the donor. So it's really a win-win. So I love that there's technology out there that can do this. I mean, think about every popular, I'm thinking about websites that I belong to. It's all subscription. Like Rihanna's Savage, by Fenty is subscription, or Birchbox, or everything is a subscription model, Amazon Prime. And if you think about it that way, we're primed to just have this subscription. So it's kind of following consumer behavior as well. So I think that's a really great point.
And if I may, Julie, that just further speaks to the identity of our digital donor, those digital nomads, where for other segments in your audience, that might seem like a bad idea to liken giving to a subscription model. But for these digital donors, it's a way of life. And I'll go further and say that with a digital donor, one of the primary needs that needs to be met is convenience. Mm-hmm. Is this easy for me? Can I do it quickly? And that's why these subscription services like Birchbox work, because I have a need for product X, but I don't want to go to the store to get it. I don't want to have to remember to get it in the future if I run out. I just want it to show up on my doorstep every few weeks or once a month. And it's the same, we have the opportunity to create that same environment in the online giving space where somebody wants to show support, but they don't want to have to go through the process every single month to make their donation.
What I think I'm taking away today, and I think is the most important point that we can take away, is that the traditional ways we've been lumping our donors together and segmenting them is just not viable anymore. So we segment our donors by how much they give, but we need to be segmenting them by where they came from and how they like to give. So yes, if you have a segment of donors that want to give by check, just know that about them. If you have a segment that likes to give monthly, if you have a segment that, your digital donors, but the traditional ways that we lump donors together, like lie bunts and side bunts and everything like that in the donor database, it's just not relevant. We need to start really considering how they came to us, where they came from, and meet them where they are. So that's a whole like mind-blowing mindset shift that exactly. I think we as a sector really need to embrace and take into account. Well, thank you, Nick, for being here today. I really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure, Julia.
Yeah. Tell us where we can learn more about you. I put your email in the chat, but tell us where we can learn more about fundraiseup and get connected.
Absolutely. I love following along with not only our customers' journeys, but the people behind those nonprofits. So I invite everybody here who is on the call today to join me on LinkedIn. You can find me at linkedin.com/in/NG Miller, or you can also just search my name and I should pop up there near the top.
But this is NG Miller. I'm typing
NG Miller, yes. Okay. And this is a great opportunity to follow along with the research that we publish here at fundraiseup and some of the other insights that we're able to provide either from our own data or through our partners like Julia. And I really like to follow along with your journey as a nonprofit and your journey as a nonprofit professional. And one of the things I love about LinkedIn is that it is a community of people who are striving for the next level of professional development. And so I'm here to join in your journey, and I would love to be a part of your journey as well. And to learn more about fundraiseup, you can also follow our company page on LinkedIn. You can also visit us at fundraiseup.com. And I invite you to email me as well. I know Julia included my email address in the chat, but it is Nick, spelled N-I-C, at fundraiseup.com. And I'm happy to answer additional questions about fundraiseup or even the research that we conduct here at the company.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. And thanks, everyone. Someone is in the waiting room and we're going to just have to say goodbye. Thanks, everyone, for bearing with me with the kind of tech issues. But I actually really liked this. I think it was great. I like to see some of your faces and your names, which I can't actually see when I do the Facebook Live. So this might be the new way.
Just like Facebook donations, Julia.
I know. Oh, right. Exactly. Seriously. Well, thank you so much, everyone. Have a fantastic Friday. This has been recorded, so if you want to watch the recording, I'm actually going to upload it to the Facebook page, to my YouTube channel, and you can check it out there. So thanks, Bobby, Jennifer, Deborah, Liz, Lisa, Dennis, Laura, all the people that I can see here. So have a fantastic weekend. and be safe. Take care. It's gorgeous weather here, so hopefully I'll get outside for a little bit. So bye, everybody. Thank you again so much.
Cheers. Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend.